Chapter 33. Link pulled on his boots made from thick animal hide, and then patted his belt for the thick gloves he had purchased from the Brazen Beak in Rito Village. The new clothes, much thicker than what he normally wore, would help keep him warm as they neared the Hebra Mountains, not to mention while he was aboard Meadow, which would be far colder still, assured Teba. He also pulled on the blue hood given to him by Telma, followed by his cloak. He was perhaps overdressed for just starting out, but not by much. The morning had brought with it a cold wind that seemed at odds with the warm late spring days that he and Cass had enjoyed on their trek across Hyrule Field. Perhaps it was the elevation here, or just the way the wind chilled while blowing over the mountains, but it served as a clear reminder of what Link was walking into. This would be the opposite of Death Mountain, but required just as much preparation, if not more. The two of them set out later than they had initially planned. That morning, as Link and Teba walked down toward Rito Village's exit, they had been stopped by a group of Rito that angrily demanded Teba stop what he was doing. Though the Rito elder had not been present, his influence certainly had been. For a brief moment, Link worried that a fight might even break out between Teba and the gathered Rito, and he thought Teba had worried about the same, considering how tense he had seemed. Eventually, the Rito let them pass without incident, though not without the warnings of doom and destruction called after them. They almost reached the bottom level when another group of Rito appeared in the path, though these appeared to be there to cheer Teba on. Teba spent little time acknowledging them, however, and soon he and Link were on their way towards the nearby stable, where the small logging community thrived. He had, after much deliberation in the night, decided to leave Spirit at the stable. While he thought the horse would have been fine in the cold, Link wasn't sure if he would be able to easily return to their destination following the attack on Meadow. Teba had informed him that there was no easy provisions for horses where they were going, and he didn't dare risk leaving Spirit out in the cold for days, while waiting for him to return. Teba would walk, and so would he. He just hoped he wouldn't return to find another Yiga ambush waiting for him. Their day's journey would take them around the northeast side of Lake Totori. There was no road, and the terrain would be difficult at times, but it was the shortest path to their destination, the flight range. Much of their travel early on was in silence. Link didn't have a problem with it at first, as it gave him time to reflect on their plan for stopping Meadow. Eventually, however, the silence began to grate on Link. He glanced over at Teba, who walked without slowing or altering his pace, eyes forward. So stoic, Link mused. Teba was the opposite of Cass in almost every way. Where Cass had been warm and full of anecdotes and stories, Teba was cold and silent. It was familiar to Link somehow, but he wasn't certain why. He's worried, Link thought as he observed Teba. Probably about his family, the village, perhaps even the fate of the world. Does he understand the importance of this mission to Hyrule as a whole? Strangely, Link didn't find that he worried about such things as much anymore. Oh, the fear of failure still had an effect on him, but after what he had been through and accomplished thus far, he was here. He was as prepared as he could be. "Are you going to keep staring at me all day?" Teba asked, breaking Link out of his introspection. He looked away quickly, sighing. Silence stretched between them again for a while longer, before he finally spoke. "Why aren't there more Rito willing to fight against the Divine Beast?" "There were," Teba said, glancing at Link out of the corner of his eyes. "But most of them were killed when the Divine Beast first arrived." "How long ago was that?" Teba grunted. "We knew the Divine Beast was around for years, but it didn't bother flying around until several months ago. And it's been terrorizing your village ever since." "No." Teba fixed Link with a more direct stare. "Cass didn't tell you." Link shook his head, and Teba sighed. When it first showed up, it didn't bother attacking unless we tried to get on board it. Most Rito were content to leave it alone. What changed? I don't know. Maybe the Elder's right, and we did by leading attacks against it. But regardless, eventually it started attacking Rito just for flying too close to it, and then for flying anywhere within sight of it. It's gotten to the point now that we can't fly anywhere, even near the ground, when it's in the sky overhead. So it's just been getting consistently worse. That's what I just said. The other divine beasts were the same way. I don't think your attacks are causing the problem. It would have gotten worse regardless. Yeah, well, yesterday Hearth was the only other Rito I could convince to attack it with me. Today, I've got you. Link ignored the implication. If we don't stop it, it will keep getting more aggressive. I'm not going to turn back this time, Teba said, eyes hard. It's flying lower than before. You think it might be getting ready to attack the village? Teba nodded. The Elder doesn't believe me. He thinks we should just all shove our heads into the ground and wait for everything to blow over. Everything made sense to Link now. Teba's insistence to lead another attack so soon, and the Rito's reticence to let him. They feared that his actions would bring the Divine Beast's wrath down on them. But Teba knew that was coming, even if he did nothing. We'll stop it before that happens, Link said. Teba looked over at him again, considering. You're not like the other Hylians I've met. How so? Most of them were cowards. Link winced. We lost everything 100 years ago. Our kingdom, our land, thousands of people. He'd just traveled through the heart of Hyrule. Link now knew, firsthand, just how much had been lost. None of the other races had even lost a fraction of what the Hylians lost. And none of them since have tried to rebuild, Teba said, pausing for a moment before continuing. Look, I'm not trying to insult your species. I'm just saying that most of the Hylians I've met seem content to wait around and let someone else do the saving. The Hylians living outside of the village, for example, haven't offered to do anything to help. They just assumed Medoh is just Rito business. Fair point, Link thought. It aligned with much of what he'd seen since beginning this journey. It wasn't laziness, or even cowardice, though. It was something closer to apathy. Many of the Hylians he'd encountered were simply living, and little more. They'd lost all hope for something better. And this whole mess began because your kingdom decided to start digging up these things, didn't it? Link frowned. It was to stop the calamity, and all the races pitched in with it. The Rito had a champion as well. Because we had to play nice with the Hylians, Teba snapped. The king ordered it, and we obeyed. And look what good it brought us. The calamity won anyway, and now there's a divine beast flying over our heads, blasting anyone near it out of the sky. Link felt his face flushing with irritation. He wished he hadn't even tried starting this conversation at this point. How many Rito have you lost because of the divine beast, compared to the thousands of Hylians killed when Ganon rose again? The tens of thousands. Teba snorted. I've heard the stories from Cass. The only reason that happened at all was because your princess couldn't— Don't! Link's voice grew dangerous. Teba opened his beak again, but Link cut him off. Do not speak ill of the princess. You don't know what she's done to keep you safe. What she's still doing today. Teba considered Link for a time, meeting his eyes. Finally, he nodded. After a moment, he spoke again. You're right. Cass has told us those stories as well. Silence fell between them again. Link walked, looking straight ahead, confronting an uncomfortable thought. Am I much better? Considering his reaction to the memories he had most recently, he wasn't so sure. He had an idea of the stress on Princess Zelda's shoulders, even then. Was it any wonder that she didn't want Link around her when facing that? Princess. I'm so sorry. The icy blast nearly pushed Link back, forcing him to duck his head and trudge forward. He used the walking staff that he'd made from the fallen tree branch to steady himself and keep moving forward through the thick snow. The pack on his back felt far heavier now than it had when first setting out. His legs ached with the exertion of continuing the climb higher and higher into the mountain range. "Almost there," Teba said, looking to look over his shoulder and ensure Link heard him. He nodded, gritting his teeth. The temperature plummeted the closer they got to the mountains. It began to rain not long after their conversation. Icy droplets of water fell on them for a time before it transitioned to a bitterly cold snow. The forests and plains gave way to snowy foothills, and eventually, icy rocks and mountain passes. Mountains loomed over them, their sides covered with snow and the occasional tree. The animal life had changed too. Though Link still saw the occasional fox or rabbit, he began to see large moose populating the forested areas, and large horned animals to the southwest, where the ground leveled out again. They were unfamiliar to him, and Teba told him they were called rhinoceroses. The cold wind didn't seem to bother Teba much as he continued to walk through the snow, though his tunic seemed slightly thicker than the one he'd worn when Link first met him. His legs were still bare, with the exception of the dark straps below his knees. His wings and face were likewise left bare. Another icy blast blew down from the mountain, and Link winced, turning his head so that the hood of his cloak caught the brunt of it. The snow fell in thick, wet flakes that stuck to his cloak and soaked his thin beard with melting ice crystals. The Rito-made clothing did help at least. The boots were surprisingly warm, even after trudging through the snow for hours, and the pants kept his legs feeling dry. The left glove was fingerless, however, likely for the purpose of making it easier to use a bow, so Link tucked that hand inside of his cloak. The snowstorm did not abate until the afternoon gave way to twilight, and they made their way into a mountain pass and onto a clearer path, where trees and shrubs had been cleared away. When the snow dissipated, their destination grew visible in the distance. A wall-less hut at the top of the path, next to a large depression in the ground ringed by mountainous rock. "There it is," Teba said, pausing to look up at the dark hut. "The flight range. Revali created it over 100 years ago to train Rito children in aerial combat." "I think I've been here before," Link said, frowning. Now that he could see the hut in the distance, it seemed familiar to Link in the way that made him certain that he had seen it before, but the memories were still locked away. Teba grunted, fixing him with an unreadable stare. Link met his eyes, wondering if the Rito still didn't believe his story of being the Hylian champion. It should have been a relief, really. His claims in Rito Village had been met with outright skepticism, unlike with the other races to the east. Here, he was a nobody. For the time being. It doesn't matter, Link thought, pushing the irritation he felt inside. As long as I'm still able to get on the Divine Beast, I don't need him to believe me. Finally, Teba turned and continued up towards the hut, and he fell back into step beside him. The wind picked up as they climbed, howling through the mountain pass, and he pulled his cloak more tightly against him. He eyed the hut as they neared it, grimacing. Like other Rito structures, it was little more than a roof over a wooden floor. There were no walls to shield them from the icy wind. It would be a miserable night indeed. "What do you remember about Revali?" Teba asked suddenly. Link looked at him in surprise. Maybe Teba wasn't as skeptical of his claims as he thought. "Not much. Not yet, anyway. He was an excellent flyer." "Yeah, we know that. Everyone remembers him because he was the best flyer, and the best archer we've had in centuries. Maybe ever. What else do you remember, though?" Link shrugged. "Nothing, really. I can vaguely remember being around him, but we did not interact much in the memories I have." He decided to keep his apparent rivalry with Revali to himself, as well as Revali's open disdain for him. that probably wouldn't help Teba's already tenuous opinion of him. Teba didn't seem pleased with his response, but pressed no further, continuing his trek up towards the flight range. Sighing, Link followed. Within another 15 minutes, they arrived at the cold structure. Now that they were upon it, Link saw that the hut sat above the ground on stilts, with a tall ladder leading up to its entrance. It sat nestled against the rock wall, with a small wooden landing stretching out over the deep depression. Once in the hut, he looked out at the flight range, frowning as he was struck again by the familiarity of this place. The flight range, it turned out, was little more than a series of targets attached to the sides of the depression by way of ropes and wooden supports. The targets varied in height, size, and color. In the center of the circular depression was a tall rock spire, also adorned by several of the targets. Link stepped down onto the small landing, surprised by the strong updraft that rose up from the bottom of the depression. The wind buffeted him from below and caused his cloak to billow around him, forcing him to draw it tightly around him. He reached the end of the landing and looked down, spotting a small body of water far below him. He reached out, holding an open palm over the rising air, wondering what would happen if he tried to ride his paraglider here. Would it be enough that it actually lifted him into the air, or would he simply sink down lower? He looked back at a noise from behind him. Teba had gone around to the sides of the hut, pulling down thick blinds and securing them with lengths of rope. They weren't quite walls, but they, with the inclusion of the fire pit in the center of the hut, would likely help to keep them warmer during the night. Already the temperatures plummeted even further than they had been during the day. Link stepped back under the shelter of the hut and walked to the side of the room, where wood had been stacked and covered from the elements. He brought several pieces over to the fire pit, setting them out to get a fire started now that the wind in the hut had been cut off. It took him several minutes to get the fire started, during which Teba closed off all the remaining openings around the hut. However, once it began, the fire consumed the tinder and licked at the wooden logs merely, giving off a heat that was incredibly welcoming. Link sighed and removed his cloak and gloves, warming his palms. "You Hylians don't do well in the cold," Teba said, as he walked over to a chest and began removing supplies from it. "We don't have a layer of feathers to keep us warm." "True." Teba sat down across from him, and Link saw that he had retrieved several thin, straight sticks and a pouch full of some kind of dark powder, along with some other materials. As Link watched, Teba crafted an arrow of sorts, tipped with a tightly wrapped pouch of the powder, and an arrowhead made of flint. He added some fletching at the bottom of the arrow, and then gently set it to the side, before grabbing another of the arrow shafts and starting a new one. "Are those explosive arrows?" Teba nodded. "What are you putting in them?" "Explosives." "Right." Link sighed and continued to warm his hands. After a time, he pulled his boots off as well, setting them beside the fire to help dry them out as well. He gazed around at the hut, noticing for the first time a number of bows of different styles hung from hooks on the ceiling. He saw several simple wooden bows, as well as some of the recurve-style bows used by the Sheikah. Some of them bore interesting embellishments at either end of the bow that looked like bird wings. One of the bows caught his eye, and Link frowned, standing. He walked across the cold wood floor and reached up, taking a very elaborate bow from its hook, and turned it over in his hand, inspecting the craftsmanship of the wood. The bow was shaped like a wide, shallow M, with the golden wingtips at its ends. A pair of thin rods extended out from its front, near the leather-wrapped hand grip. A thin blue ribbon had been affixed to one of the wings. "This was Revali's bow," Link whispered, touching the ribbon with a hesitant finger. He turned back to look at Teba, who had stopped making arrows, and watched him with a curious expression. "It's a replica," Teba said. "Hearth crafted it a few years ago based on a portrait of Revali that he saw." "It's exactly like it." Teba gazed at him for several moments before speaking again. "Did you ever see him use it?" Link spoke with barely a thought. "Yes." He had seen Revali use it. He'd seen him use a bow identical to this, right here, just outside of this hut. He could remember it clearly now, and he could remember all too well the anger he'd felt. Revali hadn't been where he was supposed to be when he and the princess first arrived in Rito Village on their impromptu trip to answer his summons. Despite their tight schedule and their need to continue on south to the desert, Revali did not apparently feel the need to wait for them at the village. Instead, he left a message for them, telling the princess, to meet him at the flight range, which was easily a full day and a half's ride away. Link assumed that Princess Zelda would be angry, that she would refuse. Certainly that's what she would have done if he had suggested anything that would have delayed them from their mission by 3 days. But she didn't. Instead, she simply took it in stride, smiling to the Rito that gave them the message, and they continued on their way. And now that they arrived at the flight range, Revali still wasn't there. It was almost enough to make Link snap. Almost. "I'm sure he will return shortly," Princess Zelda said, removing her thick gloves and crouching beside the fire that he had created, using some of the wood left in the hut. She wore a white winter coat with a wool scarf around her neck. Link had chosen to put on extra layers under his champion's tunic, and wore a thick cloak he could easily remove to get to the Master's sword underneath. Link wasn't nearly as certain as the princess regarding the Rito champion's absence. Revali had already disappointed them once, twice considering his absence now, on this trip. What's to say he wouldn't do it again? But he didn't contradict her. It felt as though he were constantly walking on thin ice with her, especially lately. Perhaps showing up the way he had, after she had suggested he had not come on this trip, hadn't been the best choice. Still, though, he had to fulfill his duties. He turned, stepping out onto the narrow landing and looking around the flight range. It was made especially for Rito archers, likely made for Revali himself, now that Link thought about it. Hadn't the village elder described it as Revali's flight range? An arrow shot over Link's head, and he started, whirling and looking for the archer. Behind him, something exploded close enough that he could feel the heat upon his back, and felt the shockwave. "Princess, get down!" he cried, throwing off his cloak and pulling the Master Sword from its sheath. He needed to move. A shadow passed overhead, almost faster than he could track with his eyes. More arrows flew through the air, but they weren't aimed at him. Instead, they were shots towards the targets in the flight range, exploding upon impact. Half a dozen arrows flew through the air in the time it would have taken Link to draw a single one, causing a small but fiery explosion upon the targets, leaving smoldering remains in their wakes. Revali swooped down before Link, holding his golden bow in his talons, passing out of view for a few moments before shooting back up into the air on a gust of powerful air. With a smooth motion, he flung the bow out in front of him with his legs, and caught it in his wings, his momentum still carrying him upwards. He drew 3 arrows back at the same time, and released them just as his upwards momentum died. Each arrow flew true, striking a different target. Revali continued this for a time, flying around the flight range and shooting targets with incredible accuracy and speed. Link was ashamed to admit that he had never seen anyone so skilled at archery before. It made his own skills, which weren't inconsequential among the Hylian knights, look paltry by comparison. Finally, Revali flew low and flapped his wings, sending a gust of wind towards Link that forced him to grab the wooden railing, lest he fall over the edge. The Rito landed easily on the railing a few feet away. He gave Link a clear smirk, and then hopped down, walking into the hut. "Ah, Your Highness," Revali said. "I see you finally made your way over here. I wasn't certain if you would arrive in time before I had to return to the village. It would have been unfortunate if you traveled all the way here, only to have turned around again." Link clenched a hand into a fist, but said nothing, following after Revali. He thought that he saw something of Princess Zelda's own irritation on her face, but she hid it well. She really only seemed to wear her emotions on her sleeve, around Link for some reason. "Yes, well, we arrived in Rito Village 2 days ago, but you were not there. the princess said, voice calm and polite. "We arrived as quickly as we could, of course." 2 days, Revali exclaimed. "Skies above, if I had known it would take you 2 days to get here. I would have told you in your little night to not even bother and wait for me there." He shook his head, but then spread his wings. "Oh well, you're here now. That's all that matters, Revali spoke to the princess, as though he were her equal, if not her better. It irritated Link to no end, but he had little choice but to hold his tongue. It was just as his father had taught him. Sometimes the hardest thing a guard could do was remain silent, but it was also among the most important. "Yes, of course," Princess Zelda said. "I'm here now, and you can explain to me more of what you wish to accomplish with your divine beast. I understand from your letter that you wish for it to be more responsive, but I'm going to need more details than that." What followed was a lengthy discussion between the princess and Revali. Revali mostly made demands, and Princess Zelda repeatedly told him that such things might not be possible. In the end, she determined several areas that she would attempt to make improvements on, but as it was getting late, they would not be done until the next day. Link found himself alone with Revali for the first time since his trip to Rito Village when Princess Zelda climbed down the ladder to answer nature's call, before settling in for the night. She had explicitly told him not to follow, and he complied, but only after stepping outside to inspect the surrounding area first. The wind shades had been long since pulled down, and the hut had become pleasantly warm. It still smelled slightly of seasoned trout and potatoes, Link's contribution to their meeting that night. Revali looked at him and smirked. Having fun traveling around with the princess. He clenched his jaw and tried to ignore the Rito bastard, focusing instead on spreading out his bedroll on the wooden floor. They had not brought hammocks, which was fine by Link. Tying them to the hooks hanging from the ceiling would have required him to stand on his toes, as he was just a few inches too short to be able to do so easily. "It is strange," Revali said, musing. "I would have thought that, by now, she would have at least be willing to look at you. I suppose she still finds your presence as unnecessary as I always have." It was hard right then not to take Revali up on his earlier offer of a duel. Link did not consider himself to be a particularly violent man, regardless of his skill with the sword. He prided himself in the ways he avoided fights and brawls during his time as a page and squire, though he was happy to admit that he usually came out on top when such things were inevitable. But he might have been willing to make an exception for Revali. If Princess Zelda weren't nearby, he likely would have. "I suppose you'll just always be a reminder of all her shortcomings." "What?" Link stood, finally turning to face Revali. "Oh, he does speak. I was beginning to worry. Could a knight so dim of wit truly... What did you mean by saying I'm a reminder of the princess's shortcomings?" Revali laughed. "You really don't know. You truly are as dim-witted as I thought." Link took a step forward, and the Rito held up his hands in a warding motion. "Oh, calm down. I have no interest in ruffling my feathers defeating you in a fight. Just tell me." Revali watched him calmly, considering. Finally, he shrugged. "Well, isn't it obvious? As ill-conceived as the notion of you being the one to defeat Ganon is, at least you have your little sword. The princess doesn't even have that. She is..." He held up his hands, palms up. "Talentless." "Don't call her that," Link said, though it lacked the passion he'd felt earlier. His mind raced with this new information. Revali snorted. "She might as well be when it comes to her duties, but she knows her way around the divine beast at least. I'll use that to ensure that I'm as ready as I can be to face down the beast myself when you inevitably fall." Link reached out and grasped the blue champion's scarf around Revali's neck, feeling his face flush with heat. He could hear his heart racing around in his ears as he glared at the Rito, who looked startled by Link's actions. He clenched his left hand into a tight fist, preparing to punch Revali right in his smug beak. "Sir Link!" Link released Revali immediately, stepping back. He glanced over to see Princess Zelda standing in the doorway. And she heard. Her cheeks were red, but that could have been because of the cold or the embarrassment. He briefly met her eyes, but her expression was difficult to read. He turned away from both her and Revali, walking to his bedroll, and keeping his back to the two other occupants of the room. Behind him, he could hear the Princess Zelda crossing the room over to her own bedroll. She made no immediate motion to climb into it, however, and he glanced over at her out of the corner of his eye. She wasn't facing him exactly, but he thought that she was looking at him in her peripheral vision as well. She seemed to want to say something. He waited. Finally, her shoulders slumped, and she pulled her outer coat off, rolling it to use as a pillow before climbing into her bedroll. Link sighed softly and climbed into his own. None of them said anything else that night. Teba woke Link before dawn. The fire had reduced to embers, and Link was wrapped tightly in his cloak and Rito-made clothing. When he sat up in his hammock, he saw that Teba was already nearly ready. His bow had been set out on one of the tables in the room, and he had a thick quiver full of explosive arrows attached to his hip. Another of the specially enlarged quivers sat on one of the tables for Link. Link carefully got out of his hammock, lowering himself to the floor. The wood floor was icy under his feet, even through his thick woolen socks, so he quickly slipped his boots on. He adjusted his clothing and cloak and began to gather his equipment. Neither of them spoke as they worked. Link gathered much of his extra gear into his pack, setting it against one side of the room. He would have to come back here to get it later. Instead, he packed light for the coming fight. His bow and assortment of arrows spread across 2 quivers: ancient sword, shield, paraglider, Sheikah slate. He had found a few other small items that he was able to strap to his belt, but he tried keeping his provisions as light as possible for the next part of their plan, which Link was least comfortable with. He would have to leave his cloak behind, and hoped that his clothing would be enough. He would have to fly with Teba. "I'm going to have you get on my back," Teba said, walking out onto the landing. "You'll be able to fly like that." Teba looked back at Link, narrowing his eyes slightly. "Why would I suggest it if I couldn't?" He looked away. "But it will be easier than having you hang below me, from my talons. Once you get up to Medoh, I'll try to drop you off on its tail. I think we damaged the cannon there on our last attack, so it should be the safest location. If not, you're going to need to be ready with that glider of yours." "Right. After that, I'll try to draw as much fire as I can. Just get to work." Link nodded. The plan was simple enough, but posed a great deal of risk to both of them. The divine beast had 2 cannons, each on its tails and each wingtip. One on its top side, and one underneath. Teba would act as if conducting an attack like last time, firing his arrows at the cannons and doing his best to damage them. From what he told Link, though, they were extremely well armored. He managed to damage a single one in the last attack, but it had happened quickly enough that he wasn't sure what did it. He hadn't had any more luck when he attacked those on the wingtips. So, Link would try to covertly destroy them, while Teba kept them occupied. He had his own bomb arrows, as well as his remote bomb rune. Between them, he hoped to find a weakness in the cannon's armor that he could exploit. If they could take out the weapons on the Divine Beast's topside, then that would hopefully allow them to disable the weapons on its underside much easier. It was a foolish plan, he knew, but it was also the only way for him to get aboard the Divine Beast. He just had to hope that the creature controlling it did not attack immediately. They intended to attack when Link tried approaching the control mechanism, so he hoped to avoid going near it and delay that flight until the Divine Beast itself had been dealt with. "Get on," Teba said, bending his knees at the edge of the platform. Link hesitated only for a moment before approaching and climbing onto Teba's back, hands firmly grasping the Rito's shoulders. Teba grunted at the additional weight, but said nothing. Instead, he spread his wings and rotated them. "Just making sure I've got the full range of motion," he said a moment later. He looked back at Link and nodded. It was time to go. Wasting no more time, He stepped off the platform. Link resisted the urge to cry out, but just barely. The world upended itself around him, as suddenly he was diving headfirst towards the pool of water and ice far below, the wind whipping at his hair and clothing. His hood blew back off his head. The surface of the water got closer and closer, and suddenly Link was struck with a terrifying thought. What if Teba can't fly with me on his back? Teba threw his wings open, catching the wind, and suddenly they righted in the air, the force of their sudden shift driving Link's forehead into Teba's back, between his shoulder blades. Link forced his head back up, and his eyes widened. Teba flew in a tight spiral around the spire in the center of the flight range, flapping his wings hard to gain altitude. The updraft helped propel him up, and after a few seconds they shot up and past the hut and out of the depression. Link gasped as they rose above the land. The snowy landscape stretched beneath them, the white of the snow still visible, despite the dim pre-dawn light. He could still see the shadowy forms of moose and rhinoceroses, as well as other creatures that he hadn't noticed before. At first he thought they were wolves, but something about them seemed wrong. They loped on all fours, but their limbs were too long, and their gait too odd to be wolves. He tapped Teba's shoulder and pointed. "What are those?" he asked, having to yell to be heard over the rushing wind. Teba looked down briefly, and then back up at Link. "Wolfos. They don't usually come this far down the mountain. I'll have to get a group of warriors to push them back after this is done." Link looked back down at the white-furred creatures and watched as one of them suddenly rose up on two legs and swiped a massive paw at a moose. The creature and its prey were soon lost from his view, however, as Teba banked, putting a grove of trees between them. They continued to climb in the air, the trees and animals below growing smaller and smaller. Link wasn't afraid of heights, but his precarious position didn't inspire great confidence in him as the ground rushed away. Every time Teba flapped, Link felt himself rise and fall on his back. He gripped the Dorito's sides tightly with his legs, but this didn't feel nearly as secure as he would have liked, and his exposed fingertips holding Teba's shoulders had already grown numb. They were suddenly bathed in light. Link squinted and looked to the east. Though the land below was still in shadow, they had risen high enough that he could still see the sun peeking over the mountains to the east. Still they flew higher. Link kept his face low and looked around in wonder at the land around them. Below, the snow had disappeared, replaced by the darkness of grassy hilltops and green trees. He could see other birds in the air, too. A flying V formation of geese flew not far away. An owl circled in a meadow beneath them. The sun continued to rise, gradually shining more of its light on the land. As it did so, Link looked ahead to see what had previously been little more than a dark shadow in the night sky. Divine beast Vah Medoh loomed in the sky before them, still circling over Rito village. It had begun to turn towards them, however, and Link heard Teba curse. "It already noticed us," he said. "Hang on, Link. It's going to get rough from here on out." It wasn't rough already? Link thought with resignation. He held on tighter as Teba sped up, beginning to drift back and forth to the left and right. Meadow sped in their direction, flying away from the village. Link hoped that the residents were prepared to take cover. A lance of white light shot towards them from one of the wings, followed by another from the opposite wing. Teba easily avoided them due to their distance, but the fire continued unabated. From their angle, the divine beast employed both upper and lower cannons, firing all four in a series of blasts that would only get more difficult for Teba to avoid as they approached. They began to rise into the air at a steeper angle, forcing Link to grit his teeth and hold on for dear life. He could hear Teba grunting and breathing hard from the exertion. The gambit worked, however, as soon only the upper cannons were able to continue their barrage. "Get ready to jump. I'll get as low as I can, but I don't want to sacrifice my speed." Link had another idea, however, and as Teba suddenly went into another dive, this time over the surface of the divine beast, he pulled the paraglider from its sheath and held it under his body, breathing rapidly. The white flashes of energy continued to shoot past him, far closer now than it had been before. Teba banked to avoid them, but he was largely relying on speed now, and the sudden drop in altitude, to stay ahead of the deadly blasts. They passed over the Divine Beast's head and wings, barely clearing a building-like structure that sat just before the tail. One of the energy blasts struck the building, causing an eruption of fire just behind them. "Get ready!" Teba cried. Link opened the paraglider over his head, and suddenly, he was wrenched free of Teba's back. It hurt his shoulders and hands far more than he had been expecting, and he barely held onto the paraglider through the process. It worked as he had hoped, however, and he now glided in the air just over the Divine Beast's flat tail, which seemed to serve as an entrance platform. Teba looped around, looking confused, but when he saw Link, he nodded. He performed a thumbs-up gesture with one of his wings, and then went into a dive, gaining more speed. He shot down out of view, and Link was alone. Link steered his paraglider down towards the tail. The Divine Beast was still moving underneath him, and Link worried that he would miss his window to land, if he didn't do so quickly. As he did so, he got his first look at one of the cannons, though this one appeared to be damaged. It had a wide dome-like base covered in ancient Sheikah designs, and a cylindrical head, with a pair of fins on either side. It sat at a slight angle, and Link could see where part of its base had been cracked and appeared to collapse under its weight. Likely from the previous attack on the Divine Beast by Teba and Hearth. The cannon didn't move, and the lights on its body that he expected to be there remained inert. Regardless, he couldn't deny what he was seeing. When Teba had mentioned cannons, his initial thought had been something closer to the cannons used by Gorons, but this was a far cry from those metal tubes. No, this is a guardian, he thought, face grim. It lacked legs, and its head was a different shape, but the design was unmistakable. It looked much like the Flying Guardians, actually, only inverted, and without propellers. Immediately upon realizing this, he felt that stab of panic that he'd felt when he first saw the Guardians since waking. Irrationally, he thought about turning his paraglider and letting himself glide away from the Divine Beast. No, Link forced such cowardly thoughts away, wresting control of his mind. I can do this. I have to do this. His feet touched down on Medo's surprisingly grassy surface, and he exhaled slowly. He looked back towards the broken guardian. They can be beat, he said, and it had to be him. He steeled himself and turned his back on the guardian. There were two others atop the Divine Beast that needed to be dealt with. Before him was the entrance into the heart of the Divine Beast. The dome-like tunnel was dark, and Link could already see the malice that coated parts of the floors and walls. Grimacing, he stepped forward, preparing to enter. "Well now, I've seen that face before," said a voice behind him. Link spun, though he suspected that he knew who the voice belonged to. Behind him stood the ghostly form of Revali, unchanged from the Rito he saw in his memories, with the exception of the green aura surrounding him. He even still had the same smirk played across his eyes. Revali. "Yes, man, you do not have to look so dumbfounded. Is it really such a shock to see me, upon Medoh?" The spectral form stepped forward, waving his wing around, as if showing off his domain. Link was immediately annoyed. "I'm here to free the Divine Beast." He paused. "And you." Yes, I know. I figured that you would find a way to show up eventually. But making me wait so long, it's a bit indulgent, don't you think?" The fingers in Link's left hand twitched, as if itching to lay the Rito out. His recent memories of Revali played in his head, adding to his sense of frustration. He tried to keep his face and voice calmer, however. "Look, I don't have time for this. I need to disable the Guardians before whatever is controlling this decides to join the fray." Revali tilted his head, looking at Link curiously. "You've changed." At first, I thought it was the plumage on your face. So patchy. But it's more than that, isn't it? Distantly, Link heard the other Guardian cannons firing. Revali heard them too, frowning. Well, come on then. They turned and entered the Divine Beast. As they passed into the shadowy interior, Revali glanced over at Link, looking him up and down. I assume you just came from my village. How are the Rito doing? Link looked at him, noticing a slight tightness around his eyes, despite the air of unconcern that he tried to show. They're flourishing better than some of the other races around Hyrule. I don't think the Guardians came this way when they attacked. I haven't seen any signs of their destruction like in the east. Good, Revali said, looking away from Link. They continued on a few more feet before the air changed, as Link knew it would be the presence of malice. Link resisted the urge to grimace as they entered a large room with multiple levels. The cavernous ceilings curved upwards, covered in Sheikah designs. He noticed several large skylights, but they had mostly been covered by the malice, leaving everything dark and shadowy. They entered the room at the upper level, and a stone bridge crossed the large opening below them. Parts of the bridge were covered in malice, but it looked to him that he could sidle around it, or step over the worst places. He glanced over at Revali for confirmation, and he nodded, stepping forward onto the bridge. Link followed, trying to pick up the pace. He didn't know how much time Teba had before one of the cannons got off a lucky shot. The Rito had already expended much of his energy just carrying him. How long has it been exactly? Revali asked, not looking back. 100 years. Revali hesitated. How are you still alive? They placed me in some kind of Sheikah machine. It brought me back. Link decided not to mention his missing memories. He didn't feel like giving Revali any more ammunition than was strictly necessary at the moment. Of course, they could only use technology for the hero with the special sword. Revali glanced back over his shoulder, and Link saw the bitterness in his yellow eyes. The rest of us were just the help. Link remained silent, not sure how to reply. He had no memories of the events leading up to the other champions' demise. His assumption was that they had no way of retrieving the champions' bodies following their death. But he truly didn't know for sure. He still didn't even know for sure if he had actually died and been resurrected, or if he was simply healed from the brink of death. Revali turned away and continued. Link caught up to him, avoiding a puddle of malice. As they crossed the bridge, Link couldn't help but to take in the full size of the chamber they were in. Though this upper level was relatively small, providing a path to get out onto the wings, the levels below them extended deep into the underbelly of the Divine Beast. There were even what appeared to be long chambers extending to the sides as well, the interiors of Medoh's wings. Sheikah machinery was everywhere. Link couldn't make sense of any of it as he gazed around the chamber. Much like the previous Divine Beasts, pipes ran along the walls, and Link saw several moving cogs interlinked with others. No water wheels in here, though. He wondered what powered these great beasts. And Princess Zelda was the one that Revali called upon to make adjustments. Link thought, suddenly curious. What kind of adjustments did she make? Did she work on the complex mechanisms that made up the Divine Beasts? How did she even know what to do with them? He couldn't dwell on such thoughts for long, however, as he soon noticed something ahead of him that drew his attention. From one of the pools of malice, a large black eye had formed and opened, watching Link with an orange vertical slit iris. It sent a shiver down his spine. Revali, what is the creature that inhabits this place like? What should I expect? Why? Are you scared? Revali asked. His demeanor shifted, returning to the unconcerned air that he so often portrayed. All hints of his previous anger were gone. It is strong and favors ranged attacks over getting close. Hopefully, you're better at aiming with that bow of yours than you used to be. Link's confidence grew as he thought of the ancient arrows in his quiver. As long as this creature didn't have access to something akin to Daruk's protective barrier, as the last one had, he thought that he could destroy this one quickly. He lengthened his stride, speeding up. Once across the bridge, Link saw what he originally hadn't seen from the other side of the room. There was another opening here, leading out onto the tops of the wings, but Malice covered much of it in pools that somehow clung to the walls and formed a web of dark goo that stretched across the entrance. Some of the Malice had even grown more solid, forming jagged spikes and pillars. There was no way for Link to get through it without touching the stuff, which Mipha had strongly warned him against doing. Outside, Link heard a series of explosions. He couldn't see what was happening from his angle, but he didn't have time to find another path through. Time to see if this works. Link pulled out the ancient sword from his belt and activated the shining blade. The Malice on the wall reacted immediately, rippling and shuddering in the presence of the blue energy. "Now, what is that?" Revali asked, curious. "No Master Sword." He inspected the Zora's sword that Link still carried on his back. "No, that's not it at all, is it? What happened to it?" Link ignored him, stepping forward and slashing at some of the goo that stretched across the entrance. The sword cut through it easily, sending up a cloud of blackish smoke as it did so. He felt the entire divine beast shudder slightly under his feet as he did so. If the Blight didn't know he was present before, it almost certainly did now. No matter. Link cut several more strands, and then held the sword to the floor, watching as the Malice parted, trying to avoid being touched by the energy blade. "We'll talk later, Revali," he said. He could feel his heart racing inside his chest. Just outside were a pair of guardians. Different, perhaps, than the ones that had killed him 100 years ago. But guardians all the same. And he was going to destroy them. Before Revali could say anything else, Link rushed outside into a storm of wind and fire.